Hello everyone and welcome to Rise Zion. My name is Seth and today I'm going to be giving you a report on the new Netflix series called American Primeval. That's right, I've been watching through the entire series as I work just to be able to give you an honest review of the series and also so that you don't have to watch it. So just so you know, this episode will contain spoilers. I don't know if you're really interested in watching it or not, but I thought that I would let you know. As many of you already know, this show heavily features members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but as the villains, as the bad guys. Of course, when I first heard about this new show, that was one of the first things that came up. People were talking about it online in the context of our faith, and I thought, okay, it sounds like just another money grab exploiting and misrepresenting our faith to a national audience, like Hulu has done recently on shows like Under the Banner of Heaven, or like Mormon Housewives, or even the recent movie that was made, Heretic, right? All of these negatively portray our faith, and it's really kind of disappointing that we still have to face this kind of bigotry in today's society. So I went into watching the show with this expectation, mind you, just because I thought the show was about the westward expansion and the title was American Primeval. It seemed to suggest to me that I was going to be given an overview of what the American frontier was generally like. Okay. And honestly, I think it does a pretty good job of portraying the rugged, gritty, and kind of dangerous conditions that would have existed during this time period. However, I was not expecting my faith to be so heavily portrayed. I thought we might appear in it like 1 or 2 episodes. But no, that wasn't the case at all. The show, if we're being honest, probably should be renamed like Mormon Primeval or something, because they totally make our faith the principal bad guys, and they're in it the entire time. And in fact, they're the main, how would you say, like the evil manipulators, the liars, the amoral antagonists that consistently move the plot forward. And Brigham Young particularly is shown as a conniving mastermind, like a villainous... a villainous sort of fellow. He's portrayed with these dark, sunken eyes and kind of a mean countenance. I guess I really shouldn't be surprised, though. Like, just the way that we've recently been treated in movies and film adaptations of our faith. When was the last time you guys seen an accurate or even a positive representation of Latter-day Saints on a new series or a show, right? It's really odd to me that we've become such a cultural thing, that we've become kind of like this punching bag where people can just say whatever they want about us, and we become like the main draw of the film. I'm going to explain that a little bit as I go into the show. I'm going to kind of give you a synopsis of what happens. Again, spoiler alerts, right? So if you're interested in watching this for yourself, and again, in addition to spoiler alerts, this movie is quite violent. The series is quite violent, and it has a lot of swear words in it, and a lot of it's not a very nice series, let's say. But I'm just going to give you a synopsis. So my first impressions of the show were fairly good. The acting was good. The costumes and the props were phenomenally done. The sets were well designed. I'll put up some photos as I'm talking so that you can see what I'm talking about here. The cinematography and the lighting, in my estimation, was also fairly good at depicting this overall gritty atmosphere that they were trying to convey. We were introduced to the 2 main characters of the series, Sarah Rowell and her son Devin. And they were sitting at a train station somewhere in Missouri, we're told. The mother says that she thinks that they're somewhere in Missouri. And they're going to meet up with Devin's father in Utah. So we kind of established what's going on. We don't understand much at this point as to why they were separated in the first place, but that's where they're going. So mother and son are greeted by their guide after a long wait. They hop into their wagon, and before you know it, they've suddenly arrived at a place called Fort Bridger in southwest Wyoming, which is quite a journey in and of itself. Okay, so I looked this up. That journey itself would have taken about 2,000 miles. The trip would have taken a really, really long time. And this is important because as I was watching, I was a bit confused. The way that they cut the scenes together made it seem like they had traveled to the fort from Missouri in just a few short hours and they arrived at nightfall. So my first critique of the series is that it doesn't do a very good job of establishing location and the scale of the true distances involved here. Okay, so additionally, my impression of Sarah and her son had not been that they had not been traveling for very far or very long when they arrived. So when in reality, they must have been traveling for such a long time from Missouri to get to Wyoming. And they also started from their home all the way in Pennsylvania. So they had been traveling for quite a long time. But they make it seem in this series as if they were just starting their journey. They make the pair seem rather naive and inexperienced with seeing new things. They look cleaner and more well put together than I would expect from roughing it for over 2,000 miles. And they act somewhat shocked and horrified at the scenes that they're confronted with at the fort when they finally do arrive. And so this just like adds to this weird confusion that it just doesn't seem like accurate, right? They would have been accustomed to being confronted with these new realities that they would have been confronted with all along, out in the Wild West. Okay, so they arrive at this Fort Bridger, right? And they proceed to look for a guide to take them to Crook Springs where their dad is. Now, no one wanted to go because, as Jim Bridger, the owner of the fort, explains, there's a whole host of dangers, including Indians, wild animals, the U.S. Army, and even the vile Mormons. and these groups of people would all likely kill them, right? Rather than let them journey through their perceived territories. Now, Sarah and Devin find a group of Mormons to travel with at the fort who seem like reasonable people. After some reluctance, the Mormon, Jacob Pratt, agrees to let them travel with their small group. Later, we learn that there's a bounty out on Sarah's head because supposedly she murdered someone in self-defense or something, we presume, back at their home in Philadelphia. And this is a part of the reason why they're fleeing, it seems like. The way that we learn that there's a bounty on Sarah's head is that a guy arrives at the fort with a poster of her, and he's looking for this mother who's known to be traveling with her son. And anyway, so they set off. Jacob Pratt and Sarah, they've already set off. They're long gone before the bounty hunter arrives. The group then rests later. We don't know the scale or how long they've been traveling, but now supposedly they've crossed into the frontier of Deseret. They're in the borders of Deseret now. And there's about 200 settlers, they say, from Arkansas that they meet up with, and they're going to rest here. But they are soon confronted by the sinister members of the Mormon militia, also known as the Nauvoo Legion, who tell them to get off their land by order of Brigham Young. Now, this is very important because they make it abundantly clear that they are acting entirely upon the authority of Brigham Young, okay? Now, when the group refuses to leave, the Nauvoo Legion comes back later wearing creepy hoods and kill almost everyone in the group of travelers, including women and children. It's just everyone. It's a horrible, horrible scene of slaughter here. Now, Sarah and Devin, of course, managed to escape, along with a few others, with the help of Isaac Reed, who has been following them since the fort to help out if needed, I guess. So they had met him previously and tried to convince him to go with them, but he refused at that point. But instead he decided to stalk them creepily from the shadows until they needed help now. It does raise some questions as to why he just didn't decide to help them in the first place. I think the reason was because they wanted to introduce the audience to Jacob Pratt, as well as to get Sarah to be introduced to Jacob Pratt. Jacob comes back later in the series as a part of the plot. They kind of follow him as well. But for the purposes of the synopsis of the film, I'm not really going to discuss Jacob Pratt or what happens with him. But anyway, so now Sarah and her son are with Isaac Reed, having escaped the dastardly Mormons. Now, I was really very confused by this attack by the evil Mormons, because as I was watching it, my thoughts were that they were trying to recreate the Mountain Meadows Massacre. I mean, that's what came to mind immediately, right? And in some way, I thought they were trying to recreate that. I realized that this was historical fiction, right? They're just making it up. But as I understood it, they were trying to draw inspiration from that event. But it was clear in any case that they were getting all of the facts wrong. So as I mentioned, evil Brigham Young gave permission for this attack and made it clear that there was to be no evidence or survivors. Okay, now in reality, that is the exact opposite of what happened in the Mountain Meadows Massacre. That occurred in what is today southern Utah near Cedar City, not in the northern border area of Deseret near Wyoming. Now, it is true that the massacre involved a group of about 120 travelers from Arkansas. The attack did involve local members of the Mormon militia in the South and some Paiute Indians, as the show depicts. However, the attack occurred over a period of days, more like a siege. It wasn't over a period of hours. There was no telegraph system in place at this time to Salt Lake City, and so when these travelers arrived from Arkansas, they sent a writer named James Haslam to consult with Brigham Young to find out what they should do just prior to the attack. Now, no one expected this group of travelers, as I said. They were just passing through, and there was a great deal of suspicion and hysteria as rumors began to spread about them. People were afraid that they had something to do with the war that the U.S. government was waging against members of the church. Now, this in no way excuses what happened at the Mountain Meadows Massacre, but it does add some important context as to the reasons for the attack. Now, reports say that Brigham Young received the messenger, James Haslam, at his office on the same day as the first day of the attack. Okay. Now, when he had learned what the militia was contemplating on doing, but what these leaders at Parowan and Cedar City were thinking about doing, he sent back a letter stating that this party was not to be meddled with. He said they should be allowed to go in peace. Now, Young's letter arrived 2 days too late on September the 13th, 1857. So Brigham Young directly opposed what happened at the Mountain Meadows Massacre, and he didn't approve of it or order it in any way. In fact, the exact opposite occurred. So American Primeval got this fact very, very wrong. And what people also don't seem to understand is that the Mormon militia and militias in general are not very well organized at this time, right? There were many different groups of militia scattered all over the Utah territories, and around these different communities, because they're just composed of community members. So it wasn't like there was just one group of militia under the direct control of Brigham Young, is what I'm trying to say. So this group of community militia members acted alone on their own volition to try to do what they thought they needed to do. And they shouldn't have done that, but they did. Anyway, so let's move forward with the plot of this very fictional show. Okay, so Sarah and Devin continue their journey with Mr. Reed. The evil Mormons send Indian hunters to go kill off the witnesses to their crime, including Sarah and Devin and Mr. Reed. Okay, now Mr. Reed fights them off in very manly fashion, but he's wounded in the process. They are taken in by the Shoshone Indians, where Mr. Reed is healed of his wounds. And shortly thereafter, Mr. Reed informs the U.S. Army Captain Dillinger that the evil Mormon militia was responsible for the massacre that they've been trying to cover up the whole time. Okay. Now, in episode 3, a lot of stuff happens, more evil plotting by the Mormons to cover up their crime. And it's in this episode that Brigham Young becomes more of a key figure in the show. We are introduced to the idea that Brigham Young wishes to purchase Fort Bridger. And this is what Brigham Young's aim is through the rest of the series. He's there periodically trying to purchase the fort, okay? They really make this character look like a villain, okay? Like Brigham Young looks like a bad guy. And I'll read you a monologue later by Jim. I believe it's Jim who's speaking. I think it might be either Jim or the captain. It's a little unclear. But he describes Brigham Young and the Latter-day Saints in general and their religion, he says, right? Now, Brigham Young wants to buy the fort to help defend against a possible attack by the U.S. Army. I guess in real life, there was a conflict involving the fort. It was said that Jim Bridger was selling ammunition and guns to the Indians and also stirring up animosity against the Latter-day Saints, which was how the conflict kind of started in real life. Anyway, at this point, I think that it's a good time to point out that we still don't know why Sarah and Devin were separated from Devin's father, and we still don't know why Sarah killed a man back in Philadelphia. We have not even been introduced to these details, and disappointingly, we've had very little character development of any of the characters. We had some hints of Mr. Reed's tortured past, but we really don't know anything about Sarah's motives nor Devin's motives. What kind of drives them as characters, as human beings, other than that Sarah, is fleeing the law because she murdered a man and she wants to meet up with her husband in Utah now. And we don't really have any of the details. So far, there's been a lot of filler, lots of violence and shocking things happen to all of the characters in the show. And it's really a relatively short series. There's only 6 episodes and we're already halfway through. Now, since we are introduced to the idea of Sarah being a murderer in the first episode, we would expect some sort of explanation by this point as to why she did it, but there's nothing. Okay. So this is very, very odd, very peculiar, and in my opinion, not very well done. The Mormons next eliminate an entire regiment of U.S. federal troops, an entire Shoshone village to cover up their tracks. Now, in reality, this never happened at all. The Nauvoo Legion never saw war or battle with U.S. forces. They never killed any soldiers, and they didn't attempt to cover up their crimes by destroying a Shoshone village. Yeah, this is a complete fabrication. All right, so this next part I actually found a pretty weird and strangely humorous in a way, even though it wasn't supposed to be. So next, Sarah, Devin, and Mr. Reed, and the character who is rather inconsequential, who's been with them this entire time. Her name is Two Moon. She's a Native American. I had to look up her name because I didn't actually know what it was. I don't think they actually say her name very much in the series. In any case, they were riding their horses through a snowstorm in the mountains. The establishing shot here seems to be suggesting that they're now in the Wasatch Mountains where it's snowy. So for no reason, all of a sudden, Devin's horse starts acting up and it starts rearing up as horses are wont to do, I suppose. And it throws Devin off the horse. And then the horse kicks him, and it looks like it kicks him like right in the face. And Devin goes down, but Mr. Reed pulls out his revolver and shoots the suddenly crazed horse once again in the shoulder. Again, we have no reason why the horse has just decided to freak out, but he misses. He misses his shot, and we're given to believe that Mr. Reed is a more capable at shooting than this. And the horse freaks out, of course, and kicks Devin again in the face, and this time he's flung into the air by the impact of the kick. And his body is flung against a tree. But Devin somehow is still alive, and the horse is still freaking out. And finally, Mr. Reed manages to shoot and kill the horse, but not before the horse stamps on Devin's leg, giving him a compound fracture. Okay, so I'm not sure about the physics involved here, but it just seems to me that Devin wouldn't be alive at this point. In any case, Devin is still alive somehow, and the scene just really kind of made me laugh, and I had to rewind it to review what I just saw. And indeed, it looks like Devin is kicked in the face 2 times by a horse, and somehow he's still alive and has no brain damage. The only damage appears to be this compound fracture that he sustained to his leg. And anyway, so this forces our group of heroes to find shelter. And it is here that Sarah shows some affection towards Mr. Reed, even though she's already married. And together they manage to get Devin better enough to travel again, despite his compound fracture, which I believe would require extensive help rather than just the few minutes that they put into fixing his leg. Anyway, so Brigham Young, in the meantime, is still plotting and scheming to buy the fort. And this is where we get this rather insulting portrayal of Brigham Young and our faith. As some sinister Batman-like villain, like a Dracula-like kind of figure. And it comes in the form of this journal entry, which is read by one of the actors. And it's really quite odd because at nowhere else in this series do we have a character having kind of like a monologue moment reading from their journal as kind of like a remembrance or something. At no other point does this happen. So it feels like super out of place and weird to add. And it's kind of funny once you get past the bigotry towards LDS people. But he says, and I believe it's the captain who's speaking of the U.S. Army. Okay. And he says, the only thing more concerning than Brigham Young's cunning intellect is his sense of righteousness towards his so-called promised land. His desire to control Fort Bridger is reflective of his desire to control the entire Utah territory. As Fort Bridger goes, so does Utah go. As goes Utah, goes the entire Mormon religion. If he is allowed to win, this land will descend into even greater darkness. I fear this darkness as no man, woman, or child shall be safe from his wrath. So Brigham Young is wrathful, you guys. Brigham Young's coming for your women and your children. I don't know. It's just like, it's so sinister the way that they portray Brigham Young. And it's not warranted like at all. And anyway, it's just humorous in a way because of the melodrama. It's humorous because they portray him as like this vampiric sort of character with dark circles around his eyes with this kind of crooked nose and this mean kind of look to him. And he's just cunning. Cunning and treacherous Brigham Young. Anyway, so yes, this rather melodramatic statement is just perpetuating real bigotry against a religious minority today. It isn't reflective of reality, nor is it historically accurate. Brigham Young is said to be kind of a humorous figure. But as we've talked about in our podcast before, the only reason this entire region exists of Utah and in the arid West in general, and that people are able to live here, is because of the order and civilization that Brigham Young built and established from nothing. It was our water conservation and our policies that allowed settlements to be established all over the arid West, where millions of people now live in relative peaceful prosperity, right? I love how they attempt to portray our religion in this series as a spreading darkness of some sort, in this short little blurb by the captain, which again is not repeated anywhere else in the series. It's the only point where we get an insight into somebody's journal entries through this sort of audio dialogue. Anyway, which ultimately it wasn't necessary to the story at all, right? We already understand from what's happened that the Mormons are the evil villainous bad guys, the evil bandits of the show, right? But it's not just that they're villainous. Okay, it's villainous specifically because of their religion, you see. And that is what this little passage seems to me to be about. Okay, now can you imagine this kind of content being presented about any other religious minority? I'm just saying, like, it would be one thing if they had presented this as sort of the motivating opinion of the day, of like sort of the general impression that the captain had. If it like wasn't so obvious that they had attempted to make the villains of the show the Mormons. Okay, it's not historical at all. And it's just insulting. I don't know how else to view it other than insulting in the way that they presented it here. Okay, now this show continues. Brigham Young finally managed to make an offer to Jim Bridger that he can't refuse to buy the fort, and announces that he'll burn the fort down to keep people out of their territory. I guess that's the whole thing that they've been trying to do. Sarah and Devin finally part ways with Mr. Reed, and they must continue their journey alone now for some reason. Which really makes no sense considering he's been traveling with them hundreds of miles by now. What's one more half mile? There's some concern. The characters express that there might be additional danger, but he says, you're fine now. It makes no sense. So they decide to part ways. Sarah confesses her love to Mr. Reed, and they share a passionate kiss. So, which is just really odd. I feel like they've been really concerned in this show about the danger that exists. I didn't really catch any chemistry between the two of them, but here they are sharing a passionate kiss now. Anyway, that happened. Both of them are married, by the way, to other people. Now, in order to understand what happens next, you have to understand that this whole time, a group of bounty hunters has been following Sarah to collect her bounty, which is $1,500. Now, we still don't know why she killed the man back in Philadelphia. The leader of these bounty hunters was named Virgil, and he was killed by Mr. Reed, I believe, if I remember right. He was killed, and unbeknownst to them, Virgil's brother has been following their group, seeking revenge this whole time. He ambushes Two Moons, Devin, and Sarah, but Mr. Reed returns just in time to save them, right? In the ensuing fight, Reed kills Virgil's brother, but is critically injured, and he succumbs to his wounds shortly after that. And the group holds a funeral for Reed, honoring him with Shoshone traditions. Standing on the hills of Crook Springs, Sarah looks westward and decides not to stay in Utah and chooses instead to continue their journey to California, leaving Crook Springs behind forever. Okay, and that's how the series ends. Yay, it's over. Overall, I've really got to be honest with you guys, the show was not great. As I said before, the costume design, the cinematography, and the sets all look really, really amazing. Like it's kind of a pretty film in some aspects. But in terms of writing, the show is really just not good at all. It's kind of garbage. The show, I feel, compensates for this by adding excessive amounts of shocking violence to try to draw people in. I think that's just kind of where writing has gone now, unfortunately. Otherwise, the show wouldn't have much going on between the characters. There's not much interest in the characters themselves, so you got to add the interest elsewhere, right? In violence and in shocking factor, right? And I'm left with a lot of questions still about the main characters. Like, I'd like to know the details about why Sarah was separated from her husband in the first place and who she killed in Philadelphia. Like, we get no resolution at all to this issue. There are massive loose threads that, and I mean, these issues constitute the principal driving factors as to why they were on this journey in the first place and in such dangerous situations in the first place. I mean, I think that they should have explained it, right? We're not given much in terms of personality or the relationship between any of the characters. They were all simply kind of thrown together by circumstances, more than by their personal choices, which might have told us something about the motivations of the characters. We don't really understand Mr. Reed's motivation as to why he decides to help them in the first place. We are left, therefore, with characters who we don't really care about at all as an audience. We don't care. We're not emotionally invested in their fates. Okay. I feel like the writers may have created the Mormons as the bad guy as one of the main draws to their show. Now, I suspect they realized they could get away with publishing this kind of harmful content about our faith, this kind of bigoted stuff, to generate buzz and some sort of appeal to the show that otherwise lacks in the writing department. Okay, I feel that the macro plot, the overall plot of what's going on in kind of the history of the region was better planned out than the micro plot, than what's happening with the individual characters, Sarah, Devin, Mr. Reed. Okay, we had a lot of moving parts going on in terms of the narrative that they were creating around Brigham Young and the fort, for example. But what on earth does what on earth does that drama have to do with Sarah and Devin, other than they stopped there briefly and the Mormons needed to kill them in order to hide their secret? It was almost like Sarah and Devin were not the main plot points at all. It seemed to me that the main plot point was this historical falsehood that they were trying to sell about the vile Mormons. That's what the show seems to be about to me. Now, Sarah's group was hunted the entire time by the Mormons because they witnessed the massacre, and it's the only reason Sarah and Devin were important at all to the show, and because of what they knew about the Mormons. That's the only reason why we really care about them, I think. Now, otherwise, the audience is really not given a reason to care at all about them. Now, and the way that the show just fabricated these events and portrayed Brigham Young in such a negative light really just creates and perpetuates harmful stereotypes about our religion. And I wish that people wouldn't do it. I'm here to make this content to sort of bring light to the situation. It is bigotry. I think that it should be called out as such, so that we can kind of be a more tolerant people towards one another and not spread this kind of misinformation. To be clear, I don't recommend that you watch this show. I probably give it 2 stars out of 5, considering that the costumes and the set looked really good, but that's about it. Now, if you haven't already, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Our goal is to reach 10,000 subscribers so that our message can reach as many people as possible. All right, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye.